What if the stars themselves held the power to topple civilizations? Picture this, a moment in history when the delicate dance of planets across the night sky wasn't just a spectacle, but a harbinger of doom. Long before telescopes or modern science, ancient rulers and scholars gazed upward, convinced that the heavens whispered secrets of rise and fall. And one day, those celestial whispers were blamed for the collapse of an empire that once spanned continents. This is the story of how planetary orbits became entangled with the fate of nations, a tale where astronomy and history collide in a mystery that still baffles us today. You might wonder how something as distant as a planet's path could shape the destiny of an entire civilization. But for our ancestors, the cosmos wasn't just a backdrop, it was a living, breathing force. They saw patterns in the stars, omens in eclipses, and warnings in the slow march of planets. When disaster struck, wars, plagues, the crumbling of mighty kingdoms, it wasn't chaos or human error they blamed. It was the sky itself, and one empire's downfall became the ultimate proof, a moment when the universe seemed to conspire against the might of mortals. So how did this idea take root, and why does it still resonate centuries later? To understand, we'll travel back to a time when the line between science and myth was blurred, when astronomers were also priests, and kings consulted the stars before waging war. We'll trace the threads of this cosmic conspiracy, from ancient observatories to crumbling scrolls, and uncover why some scholars still debate whether the planets played a role in history's greatest collapses. This isn't just about orbits and empires, it's about humanity's endless quest to find meaning in the vast, unknowable universe. And by the end, you might just look at the night sky a little differently. The night sky was never silent for ancient civilizations. It spoke in the language of moving stars and wandering planets. To the Babylonians, who charted the heavens with astonishing precision over 3,000 years ago, Jupiter wasn't just a bright dot. It was Marduk, the king of gods, whose path could foretell the rise or ruin of dynasties. Their clay tablets, etched with careful observations, reveal a world where astronomy and prophecy were inseparable. A single misaligned planet might send scribes rushing to warn the king of impending rebellion or famine. And they weren't alone. Half a world away, the Maya built towering observatories to track Venus, believing its appearances dictated the perfect time for war or coronation. For them, the great star wasn't just an object, it was a deity whose cycles could unleash chaos if ignored. What's striking isn't just their dedication to mapping the skies, but the sheer weight they placed on celestial patterns. A comet wasn't a scientific curiosity, it was a spear of doom hurled by angry gods. Eclipses, omens so dire that Chinese emperors kept astronomers on permanent watch, ready to perform rituals to avert disaster. Even the Romans, practical conquerors who built empires, trembled when Mars lingered too long in one constellation. To modern eyes, it might seem superstitious, but these cultures saw a universe woven together by invisible threads where earthly power and celestial motion were inextricably linked. This worldview wasn't born from ignorance but from a profound need to find order in chaos. When harvests failed or invaders came, the answer couldn't be random misfortune. It had to be written in the stars. Kings employed court astrologers as essential advisors, blending politics with planetary law. The famous Library of Alexandria housed scrolls detailing how Saturn's position could trigger plagues, while Persian scholars debated whether Mercury's retrograde motion could unravel treaties. Every empire had its celestial playbook, a belief that the universe didn't just watch history unfold, it directed it. Yet among these intricate systems, one idea persisted across continents. certain planetary configurations were cosmic tipping points. The Babylonians feared the Year of the Four Emperors, when Jupiter and Saturn aligned in Scorpio, a sign of bloody succession. The Maya saw doom in Venus's rare conjunctions with the Sun. And when the Gupta Empire in India began to crumble, scholars pointed to Mars and Rahu's ominous dance. These weren't just stories, they were frameworks for understanding collapse, a way to make the unthinkable feel ordained. And when a later empire fell amidst a sky full of portents, that cosmic connection would echo through history louder than ever. At its height, this empire was a marvel of human achievement, a vast network of cities, trade routes, and innovations that seemed unshakable. Stretching from sun-baked deserts to lush river valleys, its influence touched nearly every corner of the known world. Gold flowed through its markets, scholars debated in its grand academies, and armies marched under banners that inspired both awe and fear. For generations, it stood as a colossus, its power so entrenched that few could imagine a world without it. Yet in what felt like the blink of an eye, the unthinkable happened. Walls that had repelled invaders for centuries crumbled, treasuries emptied, once bustling streets fell silent. What made this collapse so shocking wasn't just its scale, but its speed. Historians still debate the exact timeline, but within a few decades, the empire fractured like a dropped vase. Some blame a cascade of bad harvests, others point to infighting among rival factions. There were whispers of strange plagues that swept through cities, leaving chaos in their wake. Invaders once held at bay now poured through undefended borders. But here's where the mystery deepens. Records from the era describe another layer to the tragedy. Scribbled in the margins of crumbling manuscripts, astrologers of the time insisted the heavens themselves had turned against the empire. They wrote of ominous signs, planets clustering in unusual formations, eclipses that stained the moon blood red, comets that lingered like unwelcome guests. To modern eyes, these might sound like superstitions, but to the people living through the collapse, they were anything but. The empire's elite had long relied on celestial omens to guide decisions when to plant, when to wage war, even when to crown a new ruler. So when the sky seemed to scream warnings, many took it as divine confirmation that their world was unraveling. And that's the haunting question at the heart of this story. Did the empire fall because of the planets, or did the planets simply become a story people told to make sense of the unthinkable? To answer that, we need to step back and see how this civilization's fate became tangled with the stars in the first place. Because long before the collapse, the seeds of this cosmic connection were sown in temples, observatories, and the very bedrock of their culture. The year was 1596, and the night sky staged a spectacle that would echo through history. On the 27th of September, 5 planets, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn, gathered so tightly in the constellation Leo that they could all be covered by an outstretched hand. This grand conjunction, a celestial event so rare it occurs only once every few centuries, sent shockwaves through observatories from Istanbul to Beijing. In Europe, astronomers scrambled to update their charts, while in the Mughal Empire, court astrologers pored over ancient texts for clues. The alignment wasn't just unusual, it was unnervingly precise, as if the universe had arranged its brightest jewels into a single, ominous pattern. What made this moment unforgettable wasn't just its rarity, but the frenzy of interpretation it unleashed. In Prague, the legendary astronomer Tycho Brahe recorded the event with meticulous detail, noting how Mars and Jupiter appeared to clash like rival kings. Meanwhile, halfway across the world, Korean stargazers called it the 5 Stars Assembly, a sign of impending upheaval. The interpretations varied wildly. Some saw it as a divine blessing, others as a cosmic warning. But one thread connected them all: the unshakable belief that this alignment held meaning far beyond astronomy. The timing only deepened the mystery. The 1590s were already a powder keg of change. Wars flared across continents, economies teetered, and empires shifted strategies. When the planets aligned, it became a lightning rod for fears and hopes alike. Ottoman scholars argued it heralded the fall of Christian kingdoms, while Spanish priests preached it signaled the Second Coming. In India, court poets wove the event into prophecies of a golden age, but the most chilling response came from an unexpected corner: the collapsing empire we've been following. Its last surviving astrologers, watching from crumbling towers, reportedly burned their own star charts in despair. To them, the conjunction wasn't just a sign, it was a death sentence written in the sky. So was this more than cosmic theater? Modern astronomers confirm the alignment was real, though its effects on Earth were purely gravitational tiny tides in distant oceans, invisible to anyone without precision instruments. But gravity isn't the only force that shapes history. Imagine living in a world where every leader, from sultans to shoguns, truly believed the planets dictated fate. Decisions when to attack, when to retreat, even when to collect taxes were delayed or accelerated based on celestial advice. Armies marched under auspicious stars. Treaties were signed only when Mercury left retrograde. In that context, the Grand Conjunction didn't need to physically topple empires. It simply had to convince the people who did. Perhaps the real power of that September night lay in its symbolism. When multiple cultures, separated by oceans and languages, all saw the same event as pivotal, it became a self-fulfilling prophecy. The sky became a mirror, reflecting humanity's deepest anxieties and ambitions. And in that reflection, empires found excuses to rise or reasons to fall. The panic of those ancient astronomers wasn't just whispered in temples. It was etched into stone, inked onto fragile scrolls, and carved into clay tablets that somehow survived the wreckage of time. In the ruins of Nineveh, archaeologists uncovered Babylonian cuneiform tablets warning of Jupiter's angry retrograde, a celestial event they claimed had preceded the fall of Akkad centuries earlier. Halfway across the world, Mayan codices painted Venus as a harbinger of war, its positions meticulously calculated to predict conflict down to the day. And in the fading light of the collapsing empire we've been following, scribes scrawled frantic notes about Mars stumbling in the sky, a sign they interpreted as the gods withdrawing their favor. What's chilling isn't just the consistency of these warnings, but the precision behind them. These weren't vague prophecies, they were detailed logs, often recorded by scholar priests who'd spent lifetimes tracking planetary motions. Take the Dresden Codex, a Mayan text so accurate it could predict Venus's position within hours, centuries before telescopes existed. Or consider the Chinese star manuals, which linked Saturn's loops to outbreaks of rebellion, noting how its lingering in certain constellations coincided with uprisings. These weren't superstitious guesses, they were patterns observed over generations, a kind of cosmic weather forecasting where the stakes were kingdoms instead of reign. Yet the most haunting records come from the empire's final years. Fragmented scrolls, salvaged from burned libraries, describe court astrologers pleading with rulers to postpone battles or cancel coronations based on planetary alignments. One account tells of a priest who, after spotting Mercury fleeing from Jupiter, warned the emperor to expect betrayal, a prediction that allegedly came true weeks later when a general defected. Another tablet recounts how the appearance of a guest star, likely a supernova, was interpreted as a funeral pyre for the empire itself. Were these just desperate attempts to explain misfortune, or did these scholars glimpse something modern science still debates? The answer might lie in how seriously these warnings were taken. When the Chinese annals describe emperors altering entire tax policies because Mars was out of harmony, or when Roman historians blame Saturn's position for the year of the four emperors, it reveals a terrifying truth. Celestial omens didn't just predict history, they shaped it. Leaders delayed grain shipments, redirected armies, or even executed rivals based on star charts. In that context, the planets didn't need to physically cause collapse. They just had to convince enough people that collapse was inevitable. Perhaps the real mystery isn't whether the stars foretold doom, but why humanity kept looking to them for answers. There's a poignant pattern in these records. The more unstable the empire, the more frantic the sky gazing. When earthly systems failed, crops withered, treaties broke, plagues spread, the heavens became the last ledger of order, a divine spreadsheet where suffering might at least make sense. And that's the tragic irony. In trying to read the universe's will, these astronomers may have missed the very human forces sealing their fate. After all, it's easier to blame the planets than to admit your empire was crumbling from within. So did they see something we've overlooked, maybe not in the stars themselves, but in the psychology of power? These records are more than astronomy, they're time capsules of fear, showing how even the most advanced societies, when faced with the unimaginable, will search the sky for a script to follow. And sometimes, just sometimes, the act of looking up becomes the very distraction that keeps them from seeing the crisis at their feet. Within months of the Grand Conjunction, the Earth itself seemed to rebel. Records from Constantinople describe a quake so violent it toppled the Hippodrome statues, while Chinese chronicles note unseasonal floods drowning entire harvests. In the Americas, Aztec codices tell of a sunless summer, when ash blotted out the sky, likely a volcanic eruption thousands of miles away. To the people living through it, this wasn't coincidence. It was cosmic wrath. The planets had aligned, and now the world was unraveling. But here's where science and superstition collide. Modern geologists confirm 1596 was indeed a year of upheaval. Tree rings show stunted growth across Eurasia, suggesting widespread drought, while ice cores reveal a spike in sulfates from eruptions. Even the timing of earthquakes aligns with historical accounts, yet none of these events were caused by Jupiter or Mars. The truth is simpler. Our planet has always been restless, and sometimes its tremors overlap with rare celestial sights. But for civilizations that saw the universe as a clockwork of divine cause and effect, the parallel was too glaring to ignore. Consider the Great Mediterranean Earthquake just 8 months after the conjunction. Contemporary scholars claimed Saturn's malefic gaze triggered it, but seismologists now trace it to the African plate grinding northward, a slow-motion collision millennia in the making. Similarly, the blood moon eclipses that terrified Europe were predictable lunar events, not punishments. But when your worldview ties earthly chaos to celestial movements, every disaster becomes a piece of the puzzle. Even the famines fit the pattern. Crop failures spread as farmers, spooked by omens, abandoned planting schedules or hoarded grain in anticipation of doom. This self-fulfilling prophecy reveals the real power of the alignment, not in moving mountains, but in moving minds. When Venetian merchants refused to sail during Mars retrograde, trade routes froze. When Persian astrologers declared Venus hostile, weddings halted for months. The planets didn't summon plagues, but panic diverted healers from cities to temples, leaving outbreaks unchecked. In this light, the domino effect wasn't magical, it was psychological, a cascade of decisions made under the weight of celestial dread. Yet some connections still give pause. Solar physicists note that the late 1590s saw a dramatic drop in sunspot activity. the start of the Little Ice Age. Could the sun's slump, coinciding with the alignment, have subtly altered weather patterns? It's a stretch to blame planets for climate shifts, but intriguing to ponder whether ancient astrologers, in their own way, sensed a larger rhythm. After all, when Maya priests linked Venus to drought cycles centuries before barometers existed, they weren't entirely wrong, just off by a few million miles in their reasoning. Perhaps the most haunting lesson lies in the ruins of the empire we followed. Excavations show its final grain silos weren't empty from blight, but from hoarding. Its last battles weren't lost to superior forces, but to armies paralyzed by inauspicious battle dates. The alignment didn't doom them, it just gave them a script for their own demise. In the end, the stars may not pull the strings of history, but they'll always mirror our deepest fears back at us, showing how easily wonder can curdle into warning when the ground shakes beneath your feet. When the walls finally cracked and the empire's shadow began to fade, the question on everyone's lips wasn't just what had happened, but who was to blame. In the chaos of collapse, fingers pointed in every direction, at greedy tax collectors, at invading armies, at weak-willed emperors. But the most enduring accusations weren't aimed at human failures at all. They were hurled upward toward the stars themselves. Scrolls from the era reveal a bitter divide among scholars and survivors. One faction, loyal to the old regime, insisted the rulers had angered the gods. Why else would the heavens send such dire omens? Their opponents fired back with equal fervor, arguing the planets had always been the true architects of fate, and their alignment had sealed the empire's doom long before any mortal misstep. This wasn't just philosophical debate, it was political warfare waged with star charts. Surviving speeches from the empire's last Senate sessions show how celestial rhetoric became a weapon. A general might dismiss a rival's strategy by citing Mars' hostile aspect, while a populist uprising gained traction by blaming Saturn's malefic glow for soaring bread prices. Even foreign diplomats played the game, with neighboring kingdoms claiming their own astrologers had foreseen the collapse. Proof, they said, that the stars favored their rise instead. The sky became a mirror for every grievance, a canvas onto which factions projected their fears and ambitions. What's striking is how these arguments mirrored deeper fractures in the empire's soul. The same scholars who'd once united under imperial patronage now splintered into warring schools of cosmic interpretation. Temple priests, who'd long served as neutral arbiters of celestial law, were suddenly accused of hiding unfavorable omens to please their patrons. One fragmentary play from the era dramatizes the tension. An astronomer is dragged before a mob for refusing to declare Jupiter's position auspicious for the emperor's new tax decree. The scene drips with irony, a civilization that had spent centuries perfecting the science of the stars now twisting it into propaganda. Yet amid the noise, a quieter tragedy unfolded. The very act of blaming the sky may have hastened the end. Chronicles describe soldiers deserting their posts after comets appeared, convinced the battle was already lost. Farmers neglected fields during cursed lunar phases, worsening food shortages. When every misfortune was framed as celestial inevitability, paralysis set in. Why resist invaders if the planets ordained their victory? Why rebuild bridges if Saturn's return promised more floods? The rhetoric of doom became a self-fulfilling prophecy, proving that sometimes the most dangerous collapse isn't of stone and steel, but of the will to fight back. In the end, the Empire's factions all got part of the truth wrong. The planets didn't conspire against them, but their belief in cosmic fate blinded them to the real cracks within. A tax system stretched too thin, a military spread across too many frontiers, a ruling class more obsessed with omens than grain supplies. These were the tinder that turned celestial sparks into an inferno. Yet there's a haunting lesson here about power and perception. When people believe the stars control their destiny strongly enough, it hardly matters whether they're right. The sky becomes a story and stories, as every fallen empire learns too late can be as crushing as any asteroid. Today's astronomers might smile at the idea of planets dictating human fate, but the universe has subtle ways of nudging history. While no serious scientist claims Jupiter's gravity triggers revolutions or Saturn's rings summon plagues, the cosmos isn't entirely silent in earthly affairs. Take Earth's wobble, a slight shift in our axis called precession, driven by the Moon and Sun's gravitational tugs. Over millennia, this wobble alters climate patterns, turning fertile regions to dust and deserts to grasslands. Civilizations reliant on predictable rains might crumble under these slow celestial shifts, never knowing the real culprit was a distant dance of gravity. Then there's the sun's own rhythm. During the so-called Maunder Minimum in the 17th century, a lull in solar activity deepened Europe's Little Ice Age, freezing rivers that once carried trade and withering crops that fed armies. No planets caused this, just the sun's natural ebb and flow. But to societies unaware of solar cycles, the timing seemed sinister. When Saturn and Jupiter aligned in 1623, just as frosts ruined harvests from France to China, even skeptical scholars wondered, could the heavens be pulling invisible strings? Gravity itself offers tantalizing threads. Every planet's tug, however faint, distorts Earth's orbit over vast timescales. These Milankovitch cycles, named for the scientist who mapped them, reshape ice ages over hundreds of thousands of years. But on shorter scales, could they nudge weather just enough to tip fragile societies? A decade of droughts here, an unseasonal storm there. The math says no. These shifts are too gradual, yet ancient astrologers weren't entirely wrong to connect dots between sky and soil. When Venus dazzled unusually bright in Mesopotamian records, it often coincided with El Niño-like droughts, not because Venus caused them, but because both events followed larger solar patterns. The real lesson isn't in the stars, but in the stories we tell about them. Modern climate models show how volcanic ash, ocean currents, or even asteroid dust can alter weather far more than any planetary alignment. But humans crave narrative, a reason behind the chaos. When the empire we've followed collapsed amid quakes and failed harvests, blaming Mars was simpler than admitting their irrigation systems couldn't adapt. Today, we might scoff at their celestial panic, yet we're not so different. When hurricanes intensify or heat waves linger, we scour data for patterns, desperate to distinguish signal from noise. The planets didn't doom that ancient empire, but their belief in cosmic control might have. So was there a grain of truth in their fears? Only this: the universe shapes Earth in whispers, not shouts. Monsoons may shift, glaciers advance, but these are slow hands turning pages in a book too vast for any civilization to read. The irony: those ancient astrologers, squinting at eclipses and tracking retrograde motions, were pioneering real science. They just mistook correlation for causation. Their true legacy isn't failed prophecies, but the stubborn human urge to look up and ask why. And that's a question even modern astrophysics can't fully answer. History remembers Emperor Augustus of Rome not just for his conquests, but for the silver coin minted with his birth sign, Capricorn gleaming beside his profile. This wasn't vanity, it was statecraft. For rulers like Augustus, astrology wasn't some private superstition, but a pillar of governance as crucial as taxes or treaties. His personal astrologer, Thrasyllus, wasn't just a stargazer, he held a seat at the imperial table, calculating the most auspicious days to address the Senate or launch military campaigns. And Rome wasn't unique. From the Forbidden City's observatories to the courts of Baghdad, kings and caliphs leaned on celestial advisors, blending astronomy with state secrets. But why trust the stars with matters of war and wheat prices? The answer lies in how ancient leaders perceived uncertainty. Without modern forecasting, rulers faced endless variables. Would the Nile flood this year? Would winter storms scatter an invasion fleet? Astrology offered the illusion of control, a way to hedge bets against chaos. When Charlemagne planned his coronation for Christmas Day in the year 800, it wasn't random. His scholars had pored over charts to ensure Jupiter, the king planet, ruled the hour. Even skeptics played along. The Mughal Emperor Akbar publicly mocked astrology, yet his court diaries reveal secret consultations before major battles. The system had its own eerie logic. Babylonian omen astrology treated the sky like a divine spreadsheet. If Mars was in Taurus during a treaty signing, the pact would fail as surely as a poorly timed harvest. Chinese emperors employed entire bureaus to monitor guest stars, supernova, that might signal heaven's displeasure. And when Queen Elizabeth's advisor John Dee warned of a great fiery trigon in 1588, England credited its celestial prep for defeating the Spanish Armada. These weren't just lucky guesses, they were calculated risks where planetary math met realpolitik. Yet the practice had fatal flaws. Astrology's vagueness let advisors cherry-pick interpretations to suit their agendas. A Byzantine chronicle recounts how two court astrologers faced the same horoscope. One promised victory, the other ruin. The emperor chose the forecast matching his ambitions, then blamed the stars when the campaign failed. Worse, rigid celestial timing could backfire. Mongol records showed generals delaying attacks during unlucky moon phases, giving enemies time to regroup. And when the stars said wait, but the grain stores said march, hunger often overruled horoscopes. Perhaps the deepest irony, some astrological guidance accidentally worked for the wrong reasons. Mayan priests who timed wars to Venus's position didn't know the planet's cycles aligned with Central America's dry seasons, ideal for marching armies. Similarly, when medieval kings avoided Mars retrograde for battles, they unintentionally dodged winter's supply shortages. The stars didn't dictate success, but their followers sometimes stumbled into sound strategy. What fascinates most isn't whether these systems worked, but how they shaped governance itself. Persian Shahs justified tax reforms by Saturn's transit, while Aztec rulers used eclipse prophecies to redistribute land. Celestial rhetoric became a tool to legitimize power or topple it. When comets appeared during Nero's reign, his opponents plastered Rome with pamphlets calling them the emperor's funeral torches. In an age without polls or press, the sky was the ultimate op-ed page. So was it superstition or sophisticated statecraft? Both. These rulers weren't fools. They operated in a world where science and spirituality hadn't yet divorced. Their astrologers were often brilliant mathematicians tracking real phenomena, just misattributing the effects. And in a strange way, their faith in cosmic order mirrors modern leaders relying on economic models or climate projections, all imperfect systems trying to tame chaos. The difference: today's policymakers blame algorithms instead of alignments when their plans collapse. Fear is a force more destructive than any invading army, especially when it wears the mask of cosmic certainty. As the empire teetered on the brink, its people didn't just see planetary alignments as warnings, they treated them as verdicts. Merchants shuttered shops for weeks when Mars entered retrograde, convinced commerce under such a sign would invite ruin. Farmers refused to plant during cursed lunar phases, even as granaries emptied. And when a comet streaked across the sky, soldiers deserted their posts en masse, believing the gods had already chosen their side. These weren't isolated acts of superstition, they were fractures in the empire's foundation, each one widening under the weight of collective dread. The psychological toll was only half the damage. Celestial panic seeped into the machinery of governance itself. Provincial governors, fearing Saturn's malefic influence, delayed tax collections, starving the treasury precisely when funds were needed to fortify borders. Diplomats missed critical negotiations, waiting for Mercury to leave its shadow period. Even the empire's famed roads grew unsafe as travelers avoided journeys during so-called void moon days, when astrologers claimed all actions were doomed to fail. What began as caution curdled into paralysis, a society so preoccupied with reading the sky that it forgot to tend to the earth beneath its feet. Historians digging through the empire's final decrees uncover a haunting pattern. The closer collapse loomed, the more officials leaned on celestial counsel. One recovered scroll shows a regional magistrate pleading for emergency grain shipments, only to be denied because Jupiter's position rendered the request inauspicious. Another records a general's desperate plea to mobilize troops against raiders, vetoed by court astrologers who insisted Mars' alignment promised certain defeat. Time and again, practical solutions were sacrificed at the altar of planetary omens. The irony, many of these dire alignments were routine astronomical events, recurring every few years without incident. But in the empire's twilight, ordinary became ominous. The most tragic victims were often the astrologers themselves. As panic spread, their once venerated role twisted into a no-win scenario. Predict favorable signs and risk blame when disaster struck, warn of danger and incite the very chaos they sought to prevent. Accounts from the final years describe seers recounting their own prophecies under threat or fleeing cities after failed predictions. One particularly poignant record tells of an astronomer who accurately forecast a lunar eclipse only to be executed when the populace took it as proof the gods had abandoned them. The sky had become a Rorschach test for despair, its patterns reflecting whatever fears people brought to it. Yet the empire's unraveling holds a lesson far beyond ancient history. When societies interpret uncertainty as fate, they surrender agency to invisible forces. The harvests failed not because Saturn willed it, but because farmers stopped rotating crops, fearing celestial displeasure. Borders collapsed not due to Mars' wrath, but because garrisons stood idle during forbidden battle dates. Everywhere, the story repeated. Belief in planetary doom didn't just predict collapse, it engineered it. Modern psychologists recognize this spiral as a feedback loop of catastrophic thinking, where fear distorts perception, which in turn justifies more fear. The empire didn't fall because the stars aligned against it. It fell because it convinced itself the stars held the power to decide. Buried in the ruins, archaeologists found one last clue to this psychological unraveling: a child's practice tablet from a scribe school, its surface etched with rows of careful cuneiform. Mixed among vocabulary drills and math exercises was a telling phrase, copied over and over like a mantra: "When the sky frowns, all efforts are dust." That single line captures the empire's final, fatal shift, from a culture that once saw the heavens as a guide to one that saw them as a verdict. The planets hadn't changed, but the people reading them had. The fall of Rome wasn't just a slow fade, it was a spectacle mirrored in the stars. When the Visigoths sacked Rome in 410, chroniclers didn't blame crumbling walls or divided legions alone. They pointed to the heavens where years earlier a bloodied Mars had lingered ominously near Saturn, a conjunction Roman astrologers called the harbinger of broken gates. Half a world away, the Khmer Empire's collapse coincided with what their astronomers recorded as a demon star eclipsing the moon, an event so dire it halted construction on Angkor Wat's grand temples. These weren't isolated moments of panic. Across continents and eras, dying empires shared one eerie habit, scripting their demise in celestial ink. Take the Ming dynasty's final years. As rebel armies closed in on Beijing, court astronomers scrambled to interpret a sudden supernova, the guest star of 1644. To the emperor's advisors, its violent light could mean only one thing: the mandate of heaven had been revoked. Within months, the last Ming ruler hanged himself on a hill overlooking his burning capital. Yet dig deeper, and you'll find the same cosmic dread plaguing the Abbasid Caliphate during its fragmentation. Persian manuscripts describe how Caliph al-Mustasim's astrologers begged him to surrender Baghdad to the Mongols in 1258, convinced a triple conjunction of Jupiter, Saturn, and Mars spelled inevitable defeat. He refused until the Tigris River supposedly turned black, fulfilling an ancient prophecy of planetary wrath. What's chilling isn't just the consistency of these stories, but the patterns hidden within them. The Maya didn't merely track Venus for agriculture, they structured wars around its 8-year cycle, believing battles waged under its malevolent phase were doomed. When drought crippled their cities between the 8th and 9th centuries, surviving inscriptions blamed a rare Star War alignment where Venus, Mars, and Jupiter clustered too tightly. Modern archaeologists found evidence of hurriedly abandoned observatories, their viewing platforms littered with shattered star charts, as if the act of recording the sky had become too painful to bear. Even supposedly rational societies weren't immune. Byzantine Emperor Constantine XI's last stand at Constantinople in 1453 was preceded by months of celestial panic. A lunar eclipse turned the moon copper red weeks before the Ottoman siege, exactly as an ancient prophecy predicted the city's fall. Soldiers reportedly deserted upon seeing it, and when maimed the second's cannons breached the walls, many Byzantines saw it not as military failure, but as the stars enforcing an overdue verdict. Yet for all these parallels, one thread connects them. The celestial narrative often emerged after the collapse, Rome's doomed planetary alignments. Mostly recorded by historians writing decades later, the Khmer's cursed eclipses, chronicled by rival kingdoms justifying their rise. It's as if humanity can't process empire-sized tragedy without draping it in cosmic significance, a way to transform chaotic ruin into something ordained, even beautiful. The truth may be simpler. Empires fall from within, from strained resources, fractured leadership, the weight of their own ambition. But when the end comes, it's easier to blame the heavens than to stare into the abyss and see our own reflection. Perhaps that's the real lesson whispered by these fallen civilizations. The stars didn't kill them, but their belief in stellar fate helped loosen the grip on reality when they needed it most. When the Maya abandoned their cities, they left behind not just crumbling pyramids, but meticulously dated eclipse tables, proof that even as famine stalked their streets, they kept watching the sky, searching for a sign that never came. Scattered across the empire's former territories, the stones still whisper their warnings. Towering temples weren't just places of worship, they were cosmic bunkers, built with precise alignments to celestial events, as if architecture could shield civilization from the sky's wrath. At the sacred site of Haran, archaeologists uncovered a temple dedicated to Saturn. Its doorway angled so precisely that the planet's dim glow would illuminate the inner sanctum once every 30 years. This wasn't aesthetics, it was desperation carved in limestone. The empire's engineers had calculated Saturn's slow orbit down to the hour, timing rituals to soothe the god they blamed for plagues and droughts. Other structures reveal even bolder attempts to bargain with the cosmos. In the ruins of a provincial capital, researchers found a circular platform studded with 32 slots, one for each major lunar phase in the empire's sacred calendar. During eclipses, priests would place offerings in specific grooves, believing the moon's shadow would drink from them instead of unleashing famine. Nearby, a drainage system carved with zodiac symbols suggests they tried channeling celestial anger literally, funneling floodwaters away from cities under cursed constellations. These weren't just monuments, they were psychological armor against a universe that seemed increasingly hostile. The most haunting evidence comes from the Empire's final decades. Excavations at border outposts reveal hastily built counter-temples, crude replicas of grand celestial shrines, erected when resources were scarce. One such site in the Northern Highlands had its altar stone deliberately cracked along a star map's lines, a ritual mutilation meant to break unfavorable omens. Archaeologists found charred animal bones stacked beneath these stones, suggesting frantic last-ditch sacrifices. But the grim punchline, carbon dating, shows these efforts peaked after the Empire's central authority collapsed, proof that even as the state crumbled, the terror of celestial disapproval outlived it. What's striking isn't just the scale of these projects, but their heartbreaking precision. At the coastal city of Antisar, marine archaeologists mapped a submerged seawall aligned to the summer solstice. Inscriptions confirm it was built during a Jupiter-Venus conjunction, timed so the planet's benevolent light would bless its foundations. Yet core samples tell another story. The wall's construction diverted critical labor from food production during a drought. The very act of appeasing the stars may have hastened the starvation it sought to prevent. Perhaps the most poignant clue lies in what wasn't built. Scrolls from the imperial archives list dozens of planned harmony temples, meant to balance planetary influences, grand structures with copper roofs to conduct celestial energy. But the blueprints were abandoned mid-scroll, their margins scribbled with increasingly frantic horoscopes. The final entry, dated just months before the capital fell, reads, "No auspicious days remain." In that admission, we glimpse the Empire's unraveling not just from invaders or crop failures, but from the crushing realization that the sky, for all their watching, would never answer. These ruins leave us with an uncomfortable question. When does reverence become surrender? The Empire didn't just build temples to honor the stars. It built them to negotiate, to plead, to ward off what it feared was inevitable. And in those stones, we see our own reflections. After all, don't we still scan the heavens for answers when disasters strike? The technology changes, but the impulse remains. To look up and whisper through equations or prayers, tell us how to survive. The difference is, we've learned the hard way that no alignment of planets will ever answer. Buried beneath layers of myth and misunderstanding lies a forgotten science. An intricate system of observation so precise it could predict eclipses centuries before modern astronomy. The priests of Babylon didn't just gaze at the stars, they logged Venus's movements with the rigor of modern scientists, tracking its cycles on clay tablets with error margins smaller than a day. Their discipline, known as astral divination, wasn't mere superstition, it was a complex language of risk assessment, blending celestial patterns with earthly outcomes. When they warned that Jupiter's retrograde might bring rebellion, they weren't guessing. They were citing centuries of data, painstakingly correlating planetary positions with historical unrest. What separated these practitioners from fortune-tellers was their method. Chinese astrologers of the Han Dynasty maintained star prisons, elaborate water clocks synchronized to planetary motions, capable of timing celestial events to the minute. A Tang Dynasty manual discovered in Dunhuang lists over 300 specific omens, each tied to planetary angles observable only with calibrated sighting tubes. These weren't vague prophecies, they were hypotheses tested across generations, refined through trial and error. When a Ming dynasty record states that Mars stumbling in the Hyades cluster preceded invasions, it's not magic, it's pattern recognition honed over lifetimes of watching the sky. Yet the most compelling evidence comes from unexpected places. Modern climate scientists studying ancient Mesopotamian tablets found startling correlations. The same ominous planetary alignments Babylonian astrologers linked to droughts often coincided with traces of volcanic sulfate in ice cores events that would have dimmed the sun and disrupted rainfall. The priests couldn't know about Indonesian eruptions, but their celestial warnings may have indirectly captured global climate shifts. Similarly, Maya eclipse records align eerily with periods of social upheaval in their cities. Not because eclipses caused chaos, but because the stress of anticipating them halting planting, postponing trade, could tip fragile systems into crisis. The tragedy of astral divination isn't that it was wrong, but that it got lost in translation. Roman scholars like Ptolemy distilled Babylonian techniques into rigid rules, stripping away the nuance. By the Middle Ages, what began as empirical observation had hardened into dogma, its original predictive power fading. Yet echoes remain. When Kepler wrote of planetary harmonies influencing Earth, he was channeling the same instinct, that the cosmos operates by interconnected rhythms we're only beginning to decipher. So were these ancient seers onto something, not in the way they thought. Planets don't dictate wars or famines, but their motions, like hands on a cosmic clock, may have helped mark moments when earthly systems were most vulnerable. The real omen wasn't in the stars themselves, but in the way their predictable cycles let civilizations anticipate the unpredictable. That's a science worth remembering. Few sights struck terror into ancient hearts like the sudden darkening of the sun. When day turned to night without warning, civilizations from China to Peru saw it as the ultimate omen, a celestial scream that kingdoms ignored at their peril. Chinese court astronomers kept meticulous eclipse records not for science but survival. Their Book of Documents recounts how Emperor Zhong Kang executed 2 royal stargazers in the 16th century BCE for failing to predict an eclipse, believing their oversight had allowed cosmic chaos to seep into the world. The event was so traumatic it became China's earliest verifiable astronomical record, etched into history as a warning. But eclipses weren't the only celestial threats. Comets, with their unpredictable appearances and ghostly tails, were universally feared as divine broomsticks sweeping away the old order. When Halley's Comet blazed across European skies in 1066, Anglo-Saxon chroniclers called it a long-haired star that brought famine and the fall of kings. Their terror wasn't misplaced. Within months, William the Conqueror crossed the English Channel, toppling Harold Roman II at Hastings. Half a world away, Aztec priests interpreted comets as the fiery breath of the god Tezcatlipoca, a sign he'd withdrawn protection from their rulers. Montezuma Roman II reportedly trembled for a year after spotting a comet in 1507, a dread that may have paralyzed his response to Spanish invaders. Even transient celestial phenomena sparked panic. The aurora borealis, rarely seen in temperate zones, sent Roman senators scrambling for interpreters when it painted Italian skies blood red in 37 BCE. They took it as Mars' omen of civil war, a prophecy fulfilled when Octavian clashed with Mark Antony. Similarly, the 3 suns illusion caused by atmospheric ice crystals, a parhelion, convinced Hungarian generals in 1527 that the heavens favored their Ottoman enemies, leading to disastrous retreats. The societal ripple effects were staggering. After the Black Sun eclipse of 59 BCE, Norse chieftains reportedly burned a dozen slaves alive to rekindle the sun's light. In Constantinople, merchants hoarded grain for years following a comet sighting in 565. triggering artificial famines. Maya kings postponed coronations for decades if Venus's evil phase coincided with their planned ascension dates, creating power vacuums that fueled coups. These weren't just knee-jerk reactions, they were calculated responses to a world view where the cosmos held veto power over human affairs. Yet the darkest irony lies in how these fears became self-fulfilling. When the starry messenger supernova lit up Earth's skies in 1054, Chinese and Islamic astronomers recorded it dispassionately. But in the Americas, Anasazi cave paintings suggest the event triggered a spiritual crisis, with communities abandoning cliff dwellings to seek new cosmic favor. Their migration wasn't caused by the star's light, but by their belief in its meaning. Similarly, when a total eclipse coincided with King Louis the Pious's death in 840, Frankish nobles interpreted it as divine judgment, fracturing Charlemagne's empire in succession wars. The sky didn't doom these societies, it simply held up a mirror to their deepest fears, and they recoiled at what they saw. What's haunting is how these ancient anxieties still echo. Modern astronauts may no longer fear eclipses, but stock markets still dip during solar storms, and hospitals report surge births during full moons. The celestial boogeymen have just traded cloaks for lab coats. Perhaps the real lesson isn't about ancient superstitions, but humanity's endless quest to find patterns, even when the universe insists on playing dice. The debate among historians isn't just about dates and documents, it's about how we assign meaning to the universe itself. On one side stand scholars who argue celestial events acted as historical triggers, not merely backdrops. They point to the 1596 Grand Conjunction, which coincided with famines, quakes, and political upheaval across 3 continents. To them, the timing isn't random. It's evidence of a fragile equilibrium where planetary alignments subtly amplified earthly tensions. These historians highlight how societies like the Maya and Babylonians structured entire calendars around cosmic cycles, suggesting they understood something modern science might overlook. A Ming Dynasty chronicle, for example, notes how a fiery guest star appeared weeks before peasant revolts crippled the treasury, an event modern astronomers now identify as a supernova visible across Eurasia. The connection, possibly psychological. When people believe the cosmos has spoken, they act accordingly. Opposing this view are researchers who dismiss such links as textbook confirmation bias. They argue that with enough historical events and enough celestial phenomena, you'll always find coincidental overlaps. For every empire that collapsed during a planetary alignment, another thrived under identical stars. The Roman Empire endured for centuries despite dozens of ominous eclipses, while the Khmer Empire's decline had more to do with silted canals than Saturn's position. These skeptics turn to statistics. If you analyze 1,000 years of eclipse records and rebellions, the correlation evaporates. The real pattern, they say, is human nature. We remember the hits and ignore the misses. When a comet blazed overhead in 1066 and William the Conqueror won at Hastings, chroniclers called it prophetic. Few noted that Halley's comet also appeared in 986, when precisely nothing consequential happened in England. Yet the middle ground holds fascinating nuance. Some historians propose a third perspective. Celestial events didn't cause collapses, but they did expose societal fault lines. Take the year without a summer in 1816, triggered by a volcanic eruption, not planets. The ensuing crop failures toppled governments not because the sky willed it, but because fragile systems couldn't adapt. Similarly, when the ancient empire we've followed blamed Mars for military defeats, the real issue was overstretched supply chains. The planets became a scapegoat, a way to avoid harder truths. This view reframes the debate entirely. It's not about whether the stars influenced history, but why humans kept insisting they did. The most compelling evidence might come from modern psychology. Studies show that during stress, people seek patterns, even false ones. In lab experiments, subjects shown random star charts will invent narratives connecting them to personal events. Ancient rulers facing droughts or invasions likely did the same. The Babylonian Enuma Anu Enlil tablets, for instance, list 70 celestial omens, but later scribes added footnotes debunking half as misreadings. Even they knew the danger of seeing signals in noise. So where does this leave us? Perhaps the truth isn't in the stars, but in the stories we hang upon them. When Tycho Brahe observed the 1572 supernova, he didn't predict doom, he saw proof the heavens could change. That shift in thinking, more than any alignment, reshaped history. The real cosmic influence wasn't gravity or omens. It was the courage to look up and question. We may have traded clay tablets for telescopes, but the sky still holds a strange power over our collective imagination. Think about the panic that erupts whenever a rogue asteroid makes headlines, even when scientists assure us it'll miss Earth by millions of miles. Or consider how solar eclipses, now perfectly predictable, still send crowds into frenzied excitement mixed with primal unease. The tools have changed, but the instinct remains. We're hardwired to search the cosmos for meaning and sometimes for menace. Take the frenzy around Planet X conspiracy theories. For centuries, astronomers hunted for a hidden world beyond Neptune, a legitimate scientific quest. But in the digital age, that search morphed into something darker. Online forums buzz with claims that this phantom planet will one day swing too close, triggering earthquakes or flipping Earth's poles. Sound familiar? It's the same dread that gripped ancient astrologers tracking Mars retrograde, just dressed in modern pseudoscience. NASA even maintains a Planetary Defense Coordination Office, partly to debunk these myths, a celestial fire department for cosmic anxiety. Yet some fears are grounded in real stakes. When the Chelyabinsk meteor exploded over Russia in 2013, its shockwave injured over 1,500 people, a visceral reminder that space isn't always benign. Modern astronomers track over 30,000 near-Earth objects, a far cry from Babylonians watching for omens, but the underlying question is the same. Could something out there catch us unprepared? The difference is scale. Where ancient priests scanned the sky for divine displeasure, today's scientists model impact probabilities down to decimal points. But both share that humbling realization: we're not entirely in control. Even our language betrays this lingering celestial unease. Financial reporters still call market crashes black swan events, harking back to when rare bird sightings were omens. Politicians invoke star-crossed policies, and athletes blame losses on Mercury retrograde. These aren't just metaphors, they're echoes of a time when the sky was a living script. And when Elon Musk names his car Tesla Roadster and launches it toward Mars, it feels less like science and more like a ritual offering to the space-age gods. Perhaps the most telling parallel lies in how we process disaster. When pandemics or climate crises strike, viral posts inevitably surface, linking them to planetary alignments or solar flares. It's the same cognitive shortcut ancient empires used. If suffering must have meaning, let the cosmos provide it. Modern astronomy may have demystified the mechanics of the universe, but it hasn't erased our need to see our struggles reflected in the stars. The telescopes got sharper, but the human gaze upward, part wonder, part wariness, stayed the same. So are we really so different from those crumbling empires? We've swapped sacrifices for satellites, but the sky still whispers warnings we can't ignore. The real evolution isn't in how we watch the heavens, but in how we've learned, sometimes, to question what they're telling us. Even as the empire's cities crumbled and its armies disbanded, its greatest treasure wasn't gold or territory, it was knowledge. In the chaotic years following the collapse, surviving scholars smuggled star charts out of burning libraries, hiding astronomical tablets in wine jars and stitching coded celestial maps into religious texts. One remarkable cache discovered in a desert monastery contained a 9th century copy of the empire's planetary tables, meticulously preserved by monks who likely didn't understand their significance beyond recognizing something precious. These fragile pages, filled with columns of numbers tracking Jupiter's motion across centuries, would eventually find their way to Baghdad's House of Wisdom, where they became foundational texts for the Islamic Golden Age's astronomical revolution. The transfer wasn't always peaceful. Crusaders looting Constantinople in 1204 reportedly found imperial astronomers still at work in underground chambers, their walls covered in fading frescoes of the zodiac. Rather than destroy these pagan images, the invaders tore them from the walls as curiosities, unwittingly preserving them in European churches where Renaissance scholars would later study them. Other fragments survived through sheer stubbornness. In the ruins of a coastal observatory, archaeologists found water-damaged scrolls where an unknown scribe had rewritten fading planetary positions in the margins, adding a poignant note for those who come after when the stars grow dim. These scattered seeds took root in unexpected ways. Persian mathematician Al-Khwarizmi used the empire's eclipse records to refine his astronomical tables, which later guided Christopher Columbus's voyages. A Mayan codex smuggled to Spain contained Venus calculations clearly borrowed from imperial methods, proving knowledge crossed oceans even when empires couldn't. Most astonishingly, when Tycho Brahe built his revolutionary Uraniborg observatory in 1576, his design echoed long-lost imperial blueprints complete with the same alignment errors. The Connection, a Byzantine manuscript in his collection, its provenance untraceable, but its diagrams unmistakably imperial. What makes this endurance remarkable isn't just the survival of data, but of methodology. The empire didn't just pass down numbers, it transmitted a way of thinking. Their technique of triangulated observation, using multiple far-flung observers to cancel out local atmospheric distortion, became standard practice in medieval Islamic astronomy. Their system of classifying stars by brightness predated modern magnitude scales by a millennium. Even their mistakes proved valuable. Later astronomers studying their phantom planet calculations realized they'd been tracking Uranus without telescopes, mistaking the slow-moving ice giant for a variable star. The ultimate irony, the empire's celestial obsession, which some blame for hastening its fall, became its most enduring legacy. When Galileo trained his telescope on Jupiter's moons, he was building on imperial theories about planetary motion. When Newton formulated gravity, he cited their eclipse records as evidence of orbital consistency. Today's space probes still use navigation principles first sketched in those crumbling observatories. The empire collapsed believing it had failed to read the sky's warnings, never realizing its true gift was teaching others how to look. Perhaps that's the real lesson written in these ancient stars. Civilizations measure their power in borders and monuments, but immortality comes in subtler forms, in numbers scratched on clay, in theories whispered across generations, in the unbroken human chain of curiosity stretching from those last desperate astronomers to the modern scientists still unpacking their discoveries. The empire built temples to last 1,000 years, but its ideas built bridges across time. The ruins may have yielded their last scrolls, but the mystery is far from settled. Satellite imaging recently revealed buried structures near the Empire's old observatories, unexcavated chambers that could hold untouched star charts or instruments. One tantalizing clue comes from a newly deciphered merchant's letter mentioning a vault of heavenly reckonings sealed during the collapse. If found, it might contain the Empire's final astronomical calculations, scrawled as the walls fell. Even more intriguing are claims from a team using ground-penetrating radar near the capital's ruins. Their scans suggest a network of underground tunnels aligned with celestial events, not just temples, but a secretive scientific complex where scholars may have worked until the very end. Then there's the puzzle of the missing years. Imperial records jump from detailed eclipse logs to frantic, fragmented notes, leaving a decade unaccounted for. Some historians speculate this gap hides a last-ditch effort to reform the celestial calendar, an admission their old system had failed. Others point to a single surviving phrase from that era: "The stars no longer heed the tables." Was this poetic despair or literal evidence that atmospheric changes, volcanic dust, or shifting obliquity made their observations unreliable? Modern astronomers could soon weigh in. By cross-referencing surviving planetary positions with computer models, they're identifying discrepancies that might reveal everything from ancient supernova to undiscovered comets visible only to those desperate final sky watchers. The biggest question isn't just what we might find, but how it could reshape history. Imagine uncovering proof that the Empire's astronomers detected Uranus or predicted solar cycles we've only recently understood. Or worse, evidence they spotted a true celestial threat, like an asteroid they misinterpreted as divine wrath. Either scenario would rewrite not just their story, but our understanding of ancient science's sophistication. Until then, the stars keep their oldest secrets, just as they did when terrified astrologers last traced their paths by flickering lamplight, watching for signs that never came. Plugging the exact date into planetarium software reveals something startling. The 1596 alignment wasn't just rare, it was a celestial ballet of near-impossible precision. Modern simulations show all 5 visible planets crammed into a patch of sky, barely 4 degrees wide, smaller than your outstretched thumb held at arm's length. Jupiter and Mars appeared so close they nearly overlapped, while Venus blazed with a brilliance that would have drowned out nearby stars. For sky watchers without telescopes, the effect would have been uncanny, like watching gods huddle in conference. But the real shock comes when astronomers rewind the cosmic clock. Running simulations backward reveals this specific configuration occurs roughly once every 500 years, yet the Empire's collapse coincided with an even rarer layer. That September, Earth's position made the planets cluster in Leo during pre-dawn hours, perfectly framed by the zodiac's most regal constellation. To ancient astrologers, this wasn't random. It was a cosmic coronation gone wrong, with planets crowning the wrong ruler. Modern software can even recreate atmospheric conditions. Volcanic dust from recent eruptions likely tinted the alignment blood red, amplifying the Omens' terror. The simulations also debunk myths. Contrary to imperial records claiming Mercury fled, the grouping telescopic models prove it held position, a discrepancy suggesting scribes may have conflated dates or bowed to political pressure. More hauntingly, spectral analysis reveals the alignment's gravitational pull on Earth was weaker than the Moon's effect on a single tide. Those tiny tugs couldn't have cracked empires, but the belief in their power certainly did. Yet one detail still unsettles astronomers. When they overlay the Empire's star charts onto digital recreations, the match is eerily exact, proof their math was flawless. These weren't primitive stargazers, they were scientists tracking planetary motions with jaw-dropping accuracy. Their fatal error wasn't poor observations, but assigning earthly meaning to celestial mechanics. The simulations don't just show us what they saw, they reveal how close they came to true understanding before fear clouded their vision. There's something deeply human about pointing to the sky when disaster strikes. It's not just ancient empires. Even today, when faced with the inexplicable, we reflexively search for patterns beyond our control. Psychologists call this apophenia, the tendency to perceive connections where none exist. Our brains are wired to prefer a terrifying cosmic explanation over the unsettling truth that sometimes chaos just happens. Imagine living through the collapse of an empire, crops failing, invaders at the gates, leaders paralyzed by infighting. The mind recoils from such senseless devastation, but if you can blame it on Mars lingering too long in Scorpio, suddenly the tragedy has meaning. The universe isn't random, it's sending a message. That illusion of order soothes the terror of unpredictability. This instinct isn't limited to pre-telescope civilizations. Modern studies show that during crises, people gravitate toward conspiracy theories and supernatural explanations at startling rates. After the 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami, rumors spread that planetary alignments had triggered the waves, despite seismologists clearly linking it to undersea tectonic shifts. During the COVID-19 pandemic, social media buzzed with claims linking virus spread to Mercury retrograde. The mechanism changes, but the psychology remains identical. When reality becomes unbearable, we rewrite it as a story where the cosmos, not human frailty or bad luck, holds the pen. The scariest part, this cosmic blame game can become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Historians analyzing the fall of the Dutch East India Company in the 1700s found a chilling parallel to ancient empires. As bankruptcy loomed, directors obsessed over astrological charts, delaying crucial decisions until auspicious dates. By the time they acted, their rivals had seized key trade routes. The stars didn't doom them, their belief in stellar doom did. Modern behavioral economists see the same pattern in stock market panics during solar flares, or farmers refusing to plant during unlucky lunar phases despite forecasted rains. When enough people act on celestial fears, those fears manifest in very real consequences. Yet there's a twist to this psychological trap. Cultures that embraced celestial uncertainty often fared better. The Vikings, who saw comets as mere sun dogs rather than omens, expanded during Europe's darkest climate crises. Tokugawa Japan's astronomers treated eclipses as natural phenomena, freeing leaders to focus on flood defenses rather than rituals. The difference wasn't intelligence, it was tolerance for ambiguity. Societies that could stare into the void of randomness without flinching proved oddly resilient. So why does cosmic scapegoating persist? Perhaps because it's easier to fear the sky than to face our own fragility. The stars make convenient villains distant, untouchable, and grand enough to shoulder blame for all of humanity's stumbles. But the real revelation isn't in ancient astrology's failures. It's in the quiet courage of those rare cultures who dared to say, the universe isn't punishing us. Sometimes terrible things just happen. That radical acceptance might be the hardest and most human lesson of all. Long after the empire's cities turned to dust, its downfall lived on in whispers around campfires and scribbled in the margins of crumbling manuscripts. The Grand Conjunction of 1596 didn't just vanish from memory, its shape shifted into legend, woven into the folklore of cultures that never even knew the empire's name. In the mountains of Anatolia, villagers still tell of a night when 5 wolves circled the moon, a tale historians trace to oral traditions describing the planetary alignment. Half a world away, the Maya's descendants speak of a star war that toppled the gods. their ancient astronomical records blurred into myth over centuries. Even the names changed. What imperial scholars called Saturn's malefic gaze became, in medieval Europe, the Devil's Congregation, a celestial gathering of dark omens. Literature, too, became a refuge for these cosmic anxieties. Persian poet Ferdowsi's Shahnameh recounts a king who ignored his astronomer's warnings of clashing stars, only to lose his throne, a thinly veiled allegory of the empire's fate. Japanese No Theatre features a haunting play about a court astrologer driven mad by his own accurate predictions, mirroring the psychological toll on the empire's last stargazers. Shakespeare, always a sponge for contemporary fears, peppered King Lear with eclipse imagery and madmen raving about planetary influence, likely inspired by English traders' accounts of the empire's collapse. These weren't just stories, they were cautionary tales, ways to process the unthinkable through the safety of fiction. The most enduring transformation, though, happened in religious texts. Scrolls found near the old imperial borderlands show how eclipse descriptions morphed into apocalyptic prophecies. A 9th century Coptic manuscript describes angels holding back the planets to delay Judgment Day, a clear echo of astrologers' frantic attempts to calculate reprieves from celestial doom. Even the Quran's mention of stars falling like scattered locusts may owe its vividness to eyewitness accounts of meteor showers during the empire's final years. The sky didn't just foretell the end, it became the canvas for humanity's deepest existential dread. Perhaps the most poignant adaptation lies in children's games. Archaeologists excavating a village built atop imperial ruins found clay marbles arranged in patterns matching Jupiter and Saturn's 1596 alignment, evidence that kids reenacted the event like a cosmic boogeyman tale. Today's astronomers might smile at the thought, but there's something universal in it. We still teach children to fear eclipses in folk rhymes, to wish on falling stars, to see the man in the moon. The empire's terror of the heavens never really died, it just learned to wear the clothes of bedtime stories, hiding its old panic in plain sight. The planets make for a dramatic villain, but history is rarely so simple. While celestial panic gripped the empire's final years, the ground beneath its feet was already crumbling from more earthly threats. Take the Great Plague that swept through its coastal cities, a contagion so brutal it left entire provinces without enough laborers to bury the dead. Contemporary accounts describe streets piled with bodies, yet imperial astrologers insisted the real culprit was Mars conjoining with a pestilent star, likely Sirius. Modern DNA analysis of mass graves tells a different story. The bacterium Yersinia pestis, the same microbe behind the Black Death, rats, not retrograde motions, brought this disaster. Then there was the economic unraveling. The empire's currency, once so stable that neighboring kingdoms used it for trade, became worthless as rulers debased coins to fund endless wars. Inflation spiraled so wildly that a loaf of bread cost a month's wages by the end. Surviving merchant ledgers show desperate trades, a chicken for a silver bracelet, a horse for a handful of salt. Yet court astronomers blamed Mercury's chaotic dance for market crashes, never acknowledging the real issue: decades of mismanagement and overspending. Military overextension played its part too. The empire's famed legions, stretched across thousands of miles of frontier, became thin as parchment. Barbarian tribes that once feared imperial garrisons now raided with impunity, sensing weakness. One poignant letter from a border commander begs for reinforcements, only to receive a reply about unfavorable lunar aspects delaying troop movements. Archaeologists find these abandoned outposts littered with hastily buried weapons, spears snapped mid-shaft, swords bent from last stands. The stars didn't break these defenses, logistics did. Even the climate turned against them. Tree ring data reveals a prolonged mega-drought during the Empire's final century, with rainfall patterns shifting unpredictably. Fields that had fed millions for generations baked into dust, forcing desperate migrations into cities already teeming with plague. Imperial astronomers interpreted the parched Earth as Saturn's dry curse, but ice cores tell us the truth. A volcanic eruption in distant Alaska had veiled the sun with ash, disrupting monsoons worldwide. The cruelest twist, some of their celestial omens were symptoms, not causes. When scribes recorded the sun growing dimmer, a proof of divine displeasure, they were unknowingly documenting atmospheric pollution from rampant deforestation. Their bleeding moon eclipses coincided with dust storms from overgrazed farmlands. In trying to read the sky, they missed the environmental collapse unfolding beneath their noses. Perhaps the real tragedy lies in how these tangible crises fed the celestial panic, creating a feedback loop of doom. Each famine made people more receptive to astrological warnings. Each planetary omen further paralyzed responses to real threats. The empire didn't fall because the stars aligned against it. It fell because by the time it looked down from the heavens, the ground had already given way. History's greatest lesson might be this: when we blame the heavens for our troubles, we stop searching for solutions on Earth. The empire's collapse wasn't written in the stars, but in neglected granaries, rusted swords, and the paralysis of leaders who mistook celestial patterns for fate. Today, we face our own versions of this trap. Climate change becomes divine punishment to some. Pandemics are framed as cosmic corrections, and economic crashes get branded as inevitable cycles rather than the results of human decisions. The mechanism hasn't changed, only the vocabulary. Instead of fearing Mars retrograde, we dread black swan events or solar maximums, wrapping modern anxieties in the same old cosmic fatalism. Consider how quickly conspiracy theories flourished during disasters. When COVID-19 emerged, social media brimmed with claims linking it to planetary alignments or solar flares. Never mind that virologists had warned of zoonotic spillover for decades. Or look at cryptocurrency crashes where traders blame Mercury retrograde for market volatility instead of unsustainable speculation. These aren't harmless superstitions, they're distractions from tangible fixes, like the empire's farmers praying to Saturn instead of digging new irrigation channels. Psychologists call this external locus of control, the tendency to attribute outcomes to outside forces rather than our own actions. Ancient astrologers projected their fears onto planetary motions. Today, we project ours onto algorithms or inevitable systemic collapses. Yet there's a crucial difference. We now have tools the empire lacked. Satellite imagery can track deforestation in real time, yet some still call wildfires acts of God. Economic models can predict recessions, yet politicians dismiss them as unfathomable twists of fate. We've replaced clay tablets with supercomputers, but the reflex remains. When systems grow too complex to understand, we invent cosmic shorthand to explain their failures. The real danger isn't in these myths themselves, but in how they absolve us of responsibility. If an economic crash is written in the stars, why regulate banks? If a hurricane is Gaia's revenge, why curb emissions? The empire's survivors learned this too late. Archaeologists find evidence of renewed agriculture in the generations after the collapse, not because the heavens grew kinder, but because farmers, freed from astrological dogma, adapted crops to the actual climate. Similarly, modern breakthroughs often follow crises that shatter old fatalisms. The Great Depression birthed financial regulations, pandemics spur vaccine innovation, and climate disasters finally push renewable energy forward. Progress begins when we stop looking for omens and start fixing what's broken. So where does this leave our relationship with the unknown? Perhaps the healthiest approach lies in the middle. Ancient astronomers weren't wrong to seek patterns, they just confused correlation with causation. Today, we can honor their curiosity while rejecting their conclusions. When we spot a troubling trend, a warming planet, a fraying social contract, we have a choice: dress it in mystical inevitability or roll up our sleeves. The stars might inspire awe, but they won't build flood barriers or fund public health. That's always been and always will be our job. Modern astronomers approach these ancient celestial fears with a mix of fascination and forensic scrutiny. Dr. Priya Desai, an astrophysicist specializing in historical astronomy at Cambridge, pulls no punches. The math behind those imperial star charts is breathtaking. They track Jupiter's moons without telescopes, calculated eclipses within minutes. But their interpretations, she laughs, tapping a reconstructed clay tablet. That's where the wheels came off. Her team recently recreated the Empire's infamous Mars in retrograde calculations using original algorithms, confirming their accuracy to within 0.003 degrees. The catch: retrograde motion is just an optical illusion from Earth's perspective, like passing a car on the highway. It happens every 2 years. Blaming it for wars is like blaming traffic jams on the color of your shirt. Not all dismiss the connection outright. Dr. Luis Rivera, a planetary geologist at Caltech, studies how celestial events might indirectly influence Earth. Ignore the astrology, focus on the physics, he insists. His research shows how alignments like the 1596 conjunction create minuscule tidal tugs on Earth's crust, potentially triggering micro-stresses along fault lines. Could a massive alignment nudge a teetering fault toward rupture? Maybe, but we're talking about increasing earthquake odds by fractions of a percent, not toppling empires. He points to the 1575 Valdivia quake, which struck decades before the Grand Conjunction, as proof that tectonic chaos doesn't need planetary excuses. The most surprising perspective comes from Dr. Yasmin Khalid, a historian of science in Baghdad. We mock their superstitions, but their methodology was revolutionary, she argues. Holding up a digitized imperial scroll, she highlights columns of eclipse predictions cross-referenced with harvest yields. This isn't magic, it's early data science. They noticed that certain alignments coincided with drought cycles and acted accordingly. The problem was assuming causation. Her work reveals how imperial astronomers inadvertently tracked El Niño patterns through planetary positions, a connection only proven in the 1980s. They were right to watch the sky for clues about Earth. They just had the wrong sky. Skepticism reaches its peak with Dr. Henry Cho, a NASA astrophysicist. Let's run the numbers, he says, pulling up a simulation of the solar system during the Empire's collapse. The screen swirls with planets, their gravitational forces rendered as glowing threads. See this? He zooms in on Jupiter's pull on Earth, a force weaker than the Moon's by a factor of 10,000. You'd need a planet 10 times Jupiter's mass parked next to us to affect tectonics or weather. These alignments were cosmic background noise, yet even Cho admires their dedication. They spent lifetimes mapping patterns we now take for granted. That's not ignorance, it's the birth of science. The through line in all these expert views, a respect for ancient rigor paired with modern clarity, as Dr. Desai puts it, they asked the right questions with the wrong tools. Today, we've flipped that. We've got the tools, but we've stopped asking some of their big, messy questions about how everything connects. Perhaps that's the real legacy of the Empire's stargazers, not their failed prophecies, but their insistence that the universe is a conversation, one we're still learning how to hear. The air hums with the energy of a civilization at its zenith. In the heart of the empire's capital, sunlight glints off marble colonnades stretching as far as the eye can see, their surfaces carved with intricate celestial maps, not as decorations but as living guides. Priests in indigo robes climb the steps of the great observatory, their arms laden with copper instruments to chart tonight's planetary dance. Below, the markets of the Grand Bazaar overflow with spices from 3 continents, their scents mingling with the ink of scribes selling freshly copied star almanacs to merchants planning trade routes. Every corner pulses with purpose. Blacksmiths forge telescope mounts alongside swords, architects consult astrologers before laying foundations, and children play with wooden orreries that model the empire's view of the cosmos. At the palace, the emperor's morning court begins not with petitions but with astronomy. A white-haired sage unrolls a vellum scroll, its edges frayed from centuries of use, and announces Venus's impending transition from evening to morning star, a shift marking the start of the sacred planting season. Nodding, the emperor turns to his generals, adjusting their campaign timelines accordingly. Nearby, envoys from distant lands clutch tribute gifts. A Nubian ambassador presents an ebony sundial calibrated for the empire's latitude, while a silk-robed diplomat from the east offers a jade disc inscribed with eclipse predictions for the next decade. The message is clear: knowledge of the heavens is the ultimate currency here. Walk the streets as dusk falls, and you'll witness the empire's true obsession come alive. Oil lamps flicker to life beneath public star charts updated daily by royal decree. Tavern debates rage over whether last week's Mercury retrograde truly caused a shipwreck in the eastern provinces. In the Academy's courtyard, students squint through crystal lenses at Jupiter's moons, competing to refine their orbital calculations. Even the beggars know the names of constellations, their upturned bowls positioned to catch coins from superstitious travelers seeking blessings during auspicious alignments. Yet beneath this glittering surface, cracks already form. The same observatory priests who so precisely track planetary motions dismiss reports of dwindling grain reserves as Saturn's temporary chastisement. Military commanders delay border fortifications, awaiting Mars' favorable aspect, and when engineers warn that aqueducts need repairs, the treasury diverts funds to gild a new zodiac ceiling in the temple. The empire has woven the cosmos so tightly into its identity that it struggles to see earthly threats, a blindness that will soon prove fatal. For now, though, the night sky remains a tapestry of wonder. As the great bronze astrolabe atop the palace gates turns to mark the hour, its shadow falls across a bustling city, utterly convinced of its place in the celestial order. No one yet imagines that within a generation, those same stars will bear witness to fires consuming the libraries, invaders looting the observatories, and the last astronomers chiseling final predictions onto walls as the roof caves in. But tonight the empire dances to the rhythm of the spheres, blissfully unaware that the universe keeps time on a scale far beyond human reckoning. Deciphering the empire's astronomical records was once like trying to read a shattered mirror. Each fragment reflected truth, but the full picture eluded scholars for centuries. That changed last year when a team at Oxford cracked the empire's numerical cipher using machine learning, revealing errors in previous translations that had obscured critical details. One breakthrough came from a fire-damaged tablet long dismissed as inventory lists. Turns out it contained precise measurements of a supernova visible in 1054 CE, previously thought recorded only by Chinese and Arabic astronomers. The empire's observers had not only noted its position near Taurus, but calculated its fading brightness over months with startling accuracy. Even more revealing are the margins of these texts. Where older translations saw random scribbles, new imaging techniques uncovered heated debates between imperial astronomers. One particularly vivid exchange in a 9th century codex shows two scholars arguing over whether a wandering star, likely Uranus, followed predictable laws or was an omen of chaos. The traditionalist scribe insists it heralds the unmaking of kingdoms, while his colleague counters with detailed orbital calculations proving its regularity. This wasn't just academic. The latter's notes reveal the emperor demoted him for impious mathematics, showing how scientific dissent could carry political consequences. The most haunting discoveries come from personal journals buried in temple archives. A recently translated scroll from the empire's final decade chronicles an astronomer's growing despair as his predictions fail. In elegant, shaking script, he describes watching Mars eclipse a star his models said should have been invisible, an impossibility that tore the fabric of the heavens as I knew them. Later entries reveal he secretly adjusted his calculations to match observations, knowing his honesty might accelerate the panic gripping the capital. It's a poignant glimpse of science struggling against dogma as the world crumbled. Perhaps the biggest revelation lies in what these texts omit. Earlier translations assumed imperial astronomers missed Neptune's existence, but corrected readings show they tracked it as early as 820 CE, dubbing it the Slow Wanderer. Their charts plot its glacial movement through Aquarius with only minor errors, yet no surviving records interpret its meaning. Was this knowledge suppressed when Neptune's 70-year cycle didn't fit astrological doctrines? Or did recognizing an unseen planet destabilize their entire cosmic worldview? The silence speaks volumes about the limits of ancient science when faced with the truly unknown. These linguistic breakthroughs do more than correct historical records. They humanize the empire's collapse. We now see not superstitious fools cowering before the sky, but brilliant minds trapped between discovery and doctrine, their equations increasingly at odds with the omens expected of them. That tension between the cosmos as it is and as we need it to be still echoes in modern science whenever new data challenges old certainties. The stars haven't changed. Only our courage to see them clearly. To the empire's priests, the planets weren't just celestial bodies, they were divine envoys, gods striding across the night sky with the power to bless or obliterate. Every flicker of a star, every shift in planetary motion carried theological weight, a direct hotline to the divine. This wasn't mere symbolism. When Mars blazed brighter than usual, it wasn't atmospheric conditions they saw, it was the war god sharpening his spear. A delayed eclipse, not orbital mechanics, but deities withholding their favor. The cosmos functioned as both clockwork and courtroom, where planetary alignments doubled as divine verdicts. This fusion of astronomy and theology created a feedback loop of dread. Consider the Babylonian god Marduk, associated with Jupiter. Temple rituals required priests to track the planet's movements with obsessive precision, because if calculations faltered, the consequences weren't just scientific errors, they were cosmic insults. A single misaligned festival date could theoretically anger the god, inviting calamity. Surviving prayers from Nineveh reveal how priests begged Jupiter Marduk to keep your steady path during political unrest, as if the planet's orbit was a literal tightrope walk between order and chaos. The empire took this further, embedding celestial fear into everyday worship. Farmers didn't just plant crops, they timed sowings to Venus's phases, believing the goddess of fertility would withhold rain if offended. Tax collectors adjusted deadlines based on Mercury's position, fearing the messenger god would curse their records. Even childbirth became celestial negotiation, with midwives consulting star charts to avoid cursed birth hours. This wasn't just tradition, it was a world view where human survival depended on reading divine moods written in planetary ink. Nowhere was this more volatile than in state religion. Imperial temples displayed elaborate zodiac mosaics not as art but as theological maps. When Saturn, the celestial judge, entered retrograde, courts adjourned, believing divine justice itself was under review. A surviving decree from the empire's zenith orders all prisoners released during one such retrograde, lest the god perceive human judgments as arrogance. Theologically, this made perfect sense. If planets were gods, their motions were divine decisions playing out in real time. The terrifying genius of this system was its unfalsifiability. Good harvests proved the gods were pleased. Bad harvests proved humanity had misread their will. When plague struck despite flawless eclipse predictions, priests argued the gods had deliberately hidden their true intentions to test faith. This created a spiritual arms race, more precise astronomy to decode divine whims, more elaborate rituals to appease them. The empire's observatories weren't just scientific institutions. They were theological bunkers, scrambling to intercept celestial wrath before it landed. Yet this very fusion may have hastened collapse. As disasters mounted, theological interpretations grew increasingly apocalyptic. Scrolls from the final years depict priests warning that the gods had turned their faces away, citing planetary positions once considered benign. Ordinary eclipses became signs of abandoned covenants, routine meteor showers, divine artillery. The sky didn't just predict doom, it became an active participant, its movements reframed as a countdown to Judgment Day. We see eerie parallels in other doomed civilizations. The Maya interpreted Venus's erratic visibility as the feathered serpent god Kukulkan withdrawing from human affairs, a prelude to their classic period collapse. Norse sagas describe the wolf god Fenrir swallowing the sun during Ragnarök, likely allegories for solar eclipses witnessed during Viking Age famines. Whether in Mesopotamia or Mesoamerica, the pattern repeats. When astronomy and theology merge too tightly, celestial events stop being natural phenomena and become existential verdicts. What makes the empire's case unique is how systematically it weaponized this fear. Coins minted during crises showed planets striking down enemy cities, reinforcing the idea that celestial favor could be militarily deployed. Provincial governors reportedly paid astronomers to adjust horoscopes after defeats, spinning losses as strategic withdrawals ordained by the stars. The line between spiritual practice and psychological warfare blurred until even the empire's leaders seemed to believe their own propaganda, delaying grain shipments or canceling treaties based on astrological theatrics. The tragic irony, some of their most devout observations contained kernels of scientific truth. The angry red Mars they feared during dust storms was indeed a portent, not of war, but of climate shifts causing both atmospheric haze and resource conflicts. Their dread of Saturn's cold gaze aligned with its 30-year orbit, roughly a human generation, making it an accidental marker of cyclical droughts. They weren't wrong to watch the skies for clues about survival. They just dressed those clues in divine robes. Perhaps the most poignant relic is a child's practice tablet found in a ruined temple school. Between clumsy star sketches, the scribbled phrase, "If the gods in heaven are angry, who will teach them to be kind?" In that question lies the empire's fatal flaw. Not in tracking the stars, but in believing they held the capacity for mercy at all. Among the ashes of the empire's collapse, the most haunting relics aren't shattered statues or burned treaties, they're the fragile voices of those who survived the unthinkable. A merchant's diary found stuffed in a clay jar near the old northern trade route captures the chaos in jagged script. The sky did not fall, but the world did. We woke to find the city gates unmanned, the granaries empty, and the stars still spinning as if nothing had changed. His account, smudged with what might be wine or tears, describes looting temples for their gilded zodiac mosaics, not for wealth, but to melt down the metal for arrowheads. When the gods abandon you, he scrawls, you learn to arm yourself with their broken promises. Then there's the scroll penned by a midwife from the eastern provinces, its edges nibbled by rodents. She recounts delivering a baby by lamplight as raiders torched the outskirts, noting how the mother begged to know if Mars was ascendant, not for the child's future, but to gauge whether it was kinder to smother the infant before the invaders arrived. I lied and said Venus ruled the hour, the midwife writes. Some truths are too heavy for a dying world. These aren't just historical records, they're psychological X-rays revealing how deeply celestial terror had seeped into everyday decisions. Perhaps the most jarring testimony comes from a royal astronomer's apprentice, his once precise handwriting now frantic strokes on a wax tablet. We were wrong about everything, he admits, describing how his mentors burned their star charts rather than let them fall into unlearned hands. But the real confession follows. The planets kept their courses. It was we who lost our way. This admission that the heavens hadn't betrayed them, but their interpretations had, cuts to the heart of the tragedy. Outside the observatory, his account mentions passing a beggar chanting, "The stars are liars who told the truth too late. Even children's voices surface." A pottery shard from a refugee camp bears a child's drawing of a stick figure family beneath a menacing scribble of red, likely a comet or fire. Beneath it, etched in a shaky adult's hand, "My son's last sky." These fragments form a mosaic of grief that no grand historical narrative can replicate. They show us collapse not as a geopolitical event, but as 1,000 private apocalypses. A scribe starving with his ink pots, a soldier deserting because the moon rose crooked, a farmer planting seeds in ashes because the almanac said spring would come. The cruelest irony, some survivors reported the night sky grew clearer after the empire fell, with observatories abandoned and temple smoke no longer hazing the air. Constellations unseen for generations blazed anew. A shepherd's letter found tucked in a monastery wall marvels. The wolf star returned first, then the sisters. They were not angry, only waiting. This quiet observation that the cosmos endured while empires turned to dust might be the most profound epitaph of all. History's greatest ironies often hide in the ruins of fallen empires. While the collapse left cities smoldering and libraries in ashes, it also shattered the rigid frameworks that had constrained scientific thought for centuries. Freed from imperial dogma, astronomers no longer had to twist observations to fit state-approved celestial doctrines. A lone scholar in Baghdad could now challenge Ptolemy's models without fearing the emperor's wrath. A monk in a crumbling monastery might repurpose abandoned observatory instruments to track comets purely for curiosity's sake. The very disaster that erased an empire's political power accidentally uncorked a bottle of intellectual ferment. Consider the fate of the imperial observatories. Once pristine temples of state sponsored astronomy, their towering instruments fell into disrepair but not disused. Enterprising scholars stripped them for parts, turning shattered astrolabes into portable quadrants and grinding cracked lenses into new telescopes. Records show that within decades of the collapse, these scavenged tools were circulating along trade routes from Cordoba to Chang'an, seeding innovation wherever they landed. The famous astronomer al-Battani, working in 9th century Syria, openly credited his breakthroughs to instruments of the old empire reborn in wiser hands. His precise solar year calculations, more accurate than Rome's, relied on refinements to a star chart originally drafted for imperial astrologers. The collapse also democratized celestial knowledge. Where once only elite priest astronomers could access imperial sky records, now merchants carried coppered fragments in their saddlebags. A recently discovered Geniza document reveals how Jewish scholars in Egypt reconstructed lost planetary tables using scraps traded by spice caravans. Even errors propagated usefully when Copernicus studied Arabic star charts in Krakow. He was actually reading mislabeled imperial data filtered through Persian translations. These imperfect transmissions became fertile ground for new theories, as discrepancies forced thinkers to question old assumptions. Most transformative was the psychological shift. With no central authority dictating cosmic interpretations, astronomers began separating observation from prophecy. The empire's last surviving star manual, smuggled to safety in Byzantium, bears marginal notes in Greek where some unknown scholar crossed out omens next to eclipse calculations and simply wrote phenomena. This quiet edit captures the revolution underway. The sky was becoming a subject of study rather than a divine message board. The ultimate proof lies in the burst of discovery that followed. Within 2 centuries of the empire's fall, scientists from Baghdad to Beijing had measured Earth's circumference, predicted solar eclipses without invoking gods, and even speculated about other worlds orbiting distant stars, ideas that would have been heresy under imperial orthodoxy. The very catastrophe that seemed like the end of knowledge turned out to be the messy birth of something new. A science unshackled from state astrology, where the stars could finally speak for themselves. The planets never conspired against the empire. No celestial court passed judgment through alignments or eclipses. Yet the unshakable belief that they did became its own kind of gravity, warping decisions until prophecy fulfilled itself. Here lies history's great paradox. The stars held no malice, but human conviction spun their light into chains. Those chains dragged down tax policies, battle plans, even the rhythm of planting and harvest, until the empire collapsed under the weight of its own cosmic fiction. What makes this more than ancient tragedy is how vividly it mirrors our modern dance with uncertainty. We've replaced planetary omens with algorithmic predictions, swapped astrologers for data analysts, yet the reflex remains the same. When chaos looms, we search the sky or the spreadsheet for patterns to soothe the terror of randomness. Stock markets still shudder during solar storms, farmers cling to almanacs despite satellite forecasts, and how many of us hesitate to launch projects during Mercury retrograde. The technology evolves, but the longing doesn't. We still crave a universe that whispers warnings before the storm. Perhaps the empire's true legacy isn't in its ruins, but in the caution it carves across centuries. There's a fine line between observing patterns and surrendering to them, between reading the stars and letting them write our fate. Modern science grants us unprecedented power to distinguish signal from noise, yet how often do we still conflate correlation with causation? When earthquakes strike during planetary alignments, headlines still ask, is the sky angry? As if nature kept celestial scorecards, this story endures because it's not really about planets or empires. It's about the stories we tell to make chaos bearable. The Maya saw Venus as a warrior. The Babylonians decoded Jupiter's movements like divine Morse code. Today, we chart climate models and economic trends with the same hunger for order. The difference is we're slowly learning to hold our narratives lightly, to let data challenge dogma, to admit when the universe refuses to fit our metaphors. So the next time you gaze at the night sky, remember, its beauty lies not in answers but in questions. Those ancient astronomers weren't fools for seeking meaning, they were human. And if their misplaced faith holds any lesson, it's this: the cosmos is vast, indifferent, and breathtakingly real. Our power comes not from decoding its whims, but from meeting its mystery with clear eyes and courage. After all, stars may guide, but only hands build. What patterns have you projected onto the blank canvas of space? Share your thoughts below. And if you've enjoyed this journey through time and sky, join us for the next adventure into history's great unknowns. The universe has more stories